Okay, welcome to another episode of the Quadruple D. And 19-year-old Edward Coristine, better known online as Big Balls, has resigned from the U.S. government's Department of Government Efficiency, or DOGE, as of June 25th, 2025, according to White House and media sources. His departure follows the exit of Elon Musk and other core members, raising uncertainty about Doge's future amid ongoing debates over bureaucratic dismantling. So, you've probably heard of Doge's origin and aims, but I'm still going to do a basic what is Doge sort of thing here. Launched by executive order on January 20th, 2025, during the second Trump term, the Department of Government Efficiency aimed to slash federal spending, modernize IT, and reduce regulation. Or at least that's what they said. They claimed that they had a mandate. With a roughly $40 million budget, DOGE deployed young technocrats, including Coristine, into key agencies, quietly wielding control over payroll systems, contract approvals, and intelligence databases to cut personnel and break down institutional checks. So it's had an impact. While DOGE claimed early savings in the tens of billions, verifying those figures has proven difficult, if not impossible, and watchdogs warn of massive losses in revenue, public services, and trust. So, what about the person in question, Big Balls or Coristine? What is his role and background? Well, his professional ascent is a bit of an odd one. Coristine was a high school graduate from Rye Country Day in New York, briefly worked at Neuralink, and later became a full time GS-15 senior advisor under GSA, or the General Services Administration, in May of 2025. So, quite recently, apparently. And during his tenure, he attended high level meetings across commerce, treasury, defense, state, DHS, CISA, USAID, OPM, and SSA, spaces where DOGE sought to fuse siloed data and centralized power, and of course, slash services to a lot of people. So, it's a symbol of tech authoritarianism. Coristine's adoption of big balls on LinkedIn drew attention as evidence of the rise of youthful technocrats repackaging power as meme driven disruption. And it's one of the almost instant controversies and red flags that we just gave this type of power to some apparent rando. You know, Wired, Reuters, and Bloomberg reported Coristine's links to hacker chat rooms, including one called the Com, and he has apparently been linked to domain registrations in Russia, and he's been known to be involved in some leak scandals, the leaking of information. So he was fired from at least one job because of that. And there are some criminal associations that he's alleged to be linked with. In March, he reportedly offered tech support to a cybercrime gang involved in harassing an FBI agent, which is a disturbing tie for someone handling national systems, you would think, right? At least for a lot of so called normies out there, that would be a bit of a scandal and a security concern. His shadowy digital past and rapid access to critical systems prompted security experts to warn of insider threats and questioned the sufficiency of vetting in DOGE and presumably other aspects of the Trump administration. And the resignation, it it does have a broader meaning. So the official exit was on June 25th, which is yesterday, as far as that goes. Coristine posted on X, "I'm officially out of that office. Feels good to finally breathe again," using the hashtag Big Balls Out, prompting the White House to confirm his resignation. So he has officially resigned. And that might mean something, or it might not, because the way things are going these days, there might be people who operate sort of in the shadows. They might not be official members of this or that. And that's an interesting dynamic that is not necessarily linked to this specific person, but it's a possible legal loophole. They can just have people in an advisory role when in fact they have possibly more power than that. And if you've ever watched the movie, I mean, this is going to sound like I'm going off topic here, but it's kind of not. Have you ever watched the movie Casino? Because the main character, played by Robert De Niro, was regularly switching around his officially or his official title to avoid any sort of legal stuff, getting sued or tied up in the courts or maybe ending up in prison. And that's what I think is going on in some of these cases with unofficial advisors. And the context here is, of course, the chaos that has been this White House. The exit of Big Balls occurred just weeks after Musk and key Lieutenant Steve Davis stepped back from DOGE, conspiring with broader uncertainty over whether DOGE's mandate to dismantle agencies and centralize data would persist. So, DOGE illustrates a grim logic of technocracy and all that kind of stuff over democratic accountability. The young cadre, propelled by a meme aesthetic, advanced sweeping cuts while wielding vast surveillance power without any democratic consent or safeguards. So that's stuff that matters. There's a lot of technocratic overreach here. DOGE fused private sector tech fantasies of speed, disruption, and cost cutting with real world governance, concentrating authority in unelected hands. And of course, the irony there is that that's sort of what Republicans are complaining about so often, that these unelected bureaucrats are in charge. Well, these people were also unelected. So, that's a little bit quaint. It's a definite double standard. And there was centralizing power across agencies, immigration, treasury, SSA, and it suggests the architecture of a master monitoring state run by weirdos and just random people who seem to come out of nowhere. So there's opaque accountability. The savings claims of 180 billion remain contested, and that's because a lot of the math just doesn't line up. And you can look into that, I'm sure, on your own. I could try to get into that here, but I'd have to pause the recording and do like at least a quick Google search or something. But you can look into that. And the oversight is weak, and the internal impacts are strong. You've got layoffs, lost revenue, lawsuits, the erosion of trust in the government, and it's been rippling across society without public benefit. In fact, I've seen people who say that the actual cost of Doge is going to be more than any sort of savings in the cost of government. And I would totally believe that because there's going to be lost revenue. One of the examples that I cited when I first started discussing Doge, when it first became a thing, is that the sea lamprey problem in various lakes in the state of Michigan that could damage the fishing industry because the departments have cut employees, at least apparently, and that could lead to their treatment of water against sea lampreys to be slashed as well. So I don't know to what extent there has been an impact on that, but that would be just one example that people were talking about, especially in the early days of Doge. Now, oddly enough, today I'm going to go to eat at a restaurant that does local fishing, so I'm going to, you know, maybe ask about that, how the fishing has been when I'm there, because I don't know if the lampreys have been as big of a problem as some feared, but they could be. So, that's one of the sort of quirky examples of how these decisions to cut spending might actually harm the public potentially. And there's a precarious precedent here. Hiring probationary technocrats with minimal vetting and revoking their access months later may leave damage and mistrust for long-term institutions. As I suggested, it just makes everything look like it's haphazard, and it makes it seem like government just cannot be competent. And that's one of the ironic things about Republican messaging, because that's one of the things they're constantly saying, but it's like a self fulfilling prophecy because they go in there and they ruin everything. Like the post office, for another example, I've had two paychecks be late because of the mail slowdowns. And I even talked to my boss about that. It became an issue, and he was like, "Well, the other paycheck was late even before Trump got into the White House for the second time, but the Postmaster General Louis DeJoy was the person who was in there already from the first Trump White House." I didn't feel like arguing with the boss, and for some reason, I don't think I thought of that at the time. But nevertheless, my paycheck was late a few times due to this apparent intentional slowdown and incompetence. And guess what? If you've got a late paycheck, that could mean your ass. It could mean you're going to be late for paying the bills. So this stuff really does have consequences. It already did impact me, apparently, unless there's some weird circumstance that caused my paycheck to be late more than once. But I think we all know that the mail has been slowing down intentionally. I think Louis DeJoy has even said that that's part of the new policy. They're reducing the number of post offices that are available, and the service has been crappier. So, looking ahead regarding Doge in general, Doge is losing key figures like Musk, Davis, and Coristine. But some questions remain. Who is accountable to citizens when algorithms and weird techno punks replace civic oversight? And you have to also wonder about Doge's temporary nature. Its sunset is apparently due in 2026, but it won't erase the centralized infrastructures it built during this window, will it? You know, the uh, the question is what exactly is Doge at this point? It it is going to become less public, but is it still going to be there, operating, doing what it does? And kind of ruining things for a lot of people. How many other people's paychecks will be late because of this intentional incompetence? So its legacy is that young hackers are acting as efficient federal gatekeepers, and that points to a formula that will likely reappear: digital natives, corporate funding, and expedient disruptions all are actually posing a challenge to decentralized community led autonomy. So, what exactly does that mean? Isn't this well? Isn't this thing we're talking about, this DOGE thing, decentralized? Well, no, it's not. Because keep in mind, even though this looked like a ragtag group of little scamps or punks or whatever you want to call them, they nevertheless do serve the privileged elite, and they do represent the centralization of power into a weird combination of corporate, Christian supremacist, and racist slash fascist technocrats. So the idea that they're rebels and they're all about decentralization, it's a myth. It's a falsehood. They are about increased centralization, actually, of power into the hands of oligarchs, technocratic oligarchs. So it's like the exact opposite of decentralization, only masquerading as decentralization. And there will be less accountability, as we have already seen. The aim is not to have more accountability, it's to scrap even the very idea of accountability. So the bottom line, I guess, is that Coristine's exit isn't just about a controversial teen technologist. He's not the only person who matters at Doge. And of course, Doge isn't the only thing that matters either. It shines a light on a broader experiment in tech led authoritarian governance. Doge's approach channels meme logic to dismantle institutions and expand surveillance, sidelining democratic process. The departure of big balls leaves a vacuum, but the Doge model remains a cautionary tale of the dangers in entrusting governance to startup style disruption of valuable and necessary services under the guise of efficiency. And lastly, here's an interesting fact. It's not really that relevant, but it's a bit of trivia. The maternal grandfather of Big Balls is Valery Martinov, who was a KGB lieutenant colonel executed by the Soviet Union as a double agent. So, yeah, that's a fun little fact. All right, so moving on to the next segment, I'm talking about the peripheral poophead of the week, which, interestingly enough, is Elon Musk, because he's relevant to the first story, but he's also got an increasingly low profile because the dude is actually unpopular. So, who is Elon Reeve Musk actually? Born in 1971, so he's 10 years older than me. Well, he is a billionaire entrepreneur best known for helming Tesla, SpaceX, X, formerly Twitter, Neuralink, and The Boring Company, and XAI. See, he's oddly obsessed with the letter X. So you know right off the bat that there's something, a little bit special about him upstairs, in his brain, that he's so obsessed with that letter. It's a quirky thing. At the very least, you have to admit that it's quirky. While Forbes places him as the world's richest person, estimating his net worth around $424.7 billion, other sources, such as Bloomberg, peg it as closer to 381 billion. And that might be because he has actually lost some of his money and his perceived net worth. Because from what I understand, part of net worth is actually the perception of value. At least I think. You can correct me if I'm wrong about that, but I do think that is a little bit rooted in the public image. sort of thing. So my public, my public image doesn't matter. So I'd probably have a net worth of like $1 or something like that. But when it comes to rich and powerful people and celebrities, the public image matters a lot more. Anyway, Musk hails from a privileged family in Pretoria, South Africa, and they were involved in the mining industry, which is known as being exploitative. After moving to Canada in 1989, Musk later earned dual bachelor's degrees in economics and physics at the University of Pennsylvania in 1997. He moved to California shortly after, launching Zip2 in 1995 and selling it in 1999. He then co founded X.com, again, obsessed with X as a letter, and that evolved into PayPal and was sold to eBay in 2002. And he used that eBay sales money to launch his space exploration company. And 2002 was also the same year that he became a U.S. citizen. So, ironically, the same person who's constantly bashing immigrants and spearheading the attempts to deport immigrants, including even legal immigrants, he was an immigrant himself. And as Snopes noted, regarding the specifics of the whole PayPal thing, in 2000, Elon Musk was fired as CEO of X.com after it merged with software company Confinity, which featured PayPal as a service. In 2001, the company was rebranded to PayPal. So he was somewhat involved in PayPal, which makes sense because he did have, you know, the bachelor's degree in economics, and that can loosely translate into sort of a business degree, from what I understand. And in 2002, Musk established SpaceX and took on the roles of CEO and chief engineer, spearheading breakthroughs in reusable rockets and commercial spaceflight. So, of course, he didn't do that alone. He had a team, and it's not just Elon Musk that I would criticize for hogging credit. Steve Jobs did that for Apple as well, and that's sort of a common theme for these corporate mascots. They end up hogging all of the credit. And to show how broad this critique is, you'll hear people say the same thing about Stan Lee regarding Marvel, and I guess Disney was sometimes accused of hogging credit for things, Walt Disney. So this isn't just something that Elon Musk gets criticized for or accused of. And a year later, he began backing Tesla and assumed leadership as CEO. Well, I struggle with the word CEO because of you know, you got the letter C and then the E after that. But he was one of the people who led the global shift toward electric vehicles. So I'll give him some credit for that. He for a time he was sort of the mascot of the electric vehicle movement, but man, he sure damaged that reputation. And Tesla has been facing boycotts because of its association with Elon Musk, and there's been talk of scrapping him as the figurehead of the company. And if Tesla is smart, they will do that indeed. And his ventures also include OpenAI and Neuralink and XAI and the Boring Company, which is a tunnel digging company with the aim of urban transit. But from what I understand, that hasn't really gone anywhere. You can correct me on that, but that's like I think that's like a weird idea where he just is trying to dig an underground tunnel for traffic or something. And I don't think that's really been successful, and people don't really even talk about that. much anymore. So if you want to discuss that with me in a comment section or something like that, go ahead. Let me know what your thoughts are on the Boring Company. I'm a little bit interested in if there's been anything done with that or if it's just a scrapped concept. I don't know. In October 2022, Musk purchased Twitter for $44 billion and rebranded it as X in 2023, which was again more of his obsession with the letter X. And he even named one of his kids a weird name with the letter X prominent in it. So, it's just obsessed with that letter. His takeover of Twitter ignited mass layoffs, sparked debates over content moderation, and triggered protests across US and European Tesla showrooms. And in February 2025, during Donald Trump's second presidential term, Musk joined the White House as a senior advisor and headed a newly created Department of Government Efficiency, which I talked about already. And he claimed aims of $1 to $2 trillion in federal spending cuts, which would be weird because I would cut pretty much all spending, or at least a huge amount of it. In practice, DOGE ordered mass layoffs, eliminated entire agencies, and loosened regulatory oversight, actions described as almost negligible cost reductions and met with widespread legal challenges. So during his approximately 130-day tenure, DOGE claimed roughly $175 billion in taxpayer savings, but independent analysis reduced that to around 19 to 55 billion, which is less than 0.5% of federal spending. And there are disputes over its legality, which has culminated in ongoing lawsuits alleging violations of constitutional checks and privacy laws. So, of course, a notable example of a person in DOGE is the big balls, the 19-year-old staffer that I just talked about. And another senior DOGE hire is Sahil Lavingya. He was dismissed after publicly noting some public sector processes worked better than Musk expected. So by late May of 2025, Musk also got in trouble for criticizing Trump's $3.8 trillion big beautiful bill, calling it deficit increasing and saying a bill can be big or it can be beautiful, but I don't know if it can be both. He stepped down and retreated from active government involvement, and there was a feud with Trump as a result of his critiques, in which he even resorted to linking Trump to Jeffrey Epstein. So, despite the rhetoric of this being, a liberatory organization, it's about power, not liberation. Musk's Doge reflects the same logic that, people who are critical of government reject, the top-down efficiency imposed without democratic accountability. He wielded corporate logic in government, firing public servants en masse and dismantling agencies with little transparency or consent, and that's authoritarian, not liberatory. There is privatization by default as one of the aims here. Many Doge moves, many Doge moves resemble stealth privatization, outsourcing public goods, shredding regulatory guards, and inserting unaccountable aides into agencies. And it's token opposition, not real change. Rather than dismantling illegitimate hierarchies, Musk's reforms reinforce them, centralizing power in opaque private hands rather than democratizing access to resources. So this isn't really about people power, it's actually about reducing the power of people in government. The ordinary citizen will actually have less of a say as a result in these efforts. And grassroots efforts like the Tesla takedown protests, they really show a deep desire to challenge technocratic authoritarianism here. So Elon Musk remains a titan of capital, considered a visionary in space, electronic vehicles, and brain interfaces and AI. But he's also a stark avatar of corporate government capture. His government experiment was less reform, more authoritarian intervention. So genuine transformation means dismantling the harmful hierarchical power that people like Elon Musk actually love. And it's not about rebranding efficiency under billionaire rule. So, okay, we're going to shift gears here a little bit, ever so slightly, and look at the fetid fever dream flashback of the week. Who is Elon Musk? I previously examined the story of May Musk, Elon's mom, but this time let's look at the dad. Is he an upstanding character? Well, the biggest scandal involving Elon Musk, father of Elon Musk, is his relationship with his stepdaughter, Jaina, who is 42 years younger than him. And by relationship, yes, it is that type of relationship. Errol began raising Jaina when she was around 4 years old after marrying her mother. Despite being a stepfather figure, he later had two children with Jaina as an adult. And this sparked significant public outrage and media coverage, especially due to the perceived abuse of power and the questionable boundaries, or the breaking of boundaries here. So much of the analysis of the scandal centers around power dynamics, consent, authority, and how much coercion was involved in this relationship. Because again, he was a parental figure. So there's the possibility of an abuse of power and paternalism. The relationship raises red flags about hierarchical power within the family unit. As a parental figure, Elon Musk held structural and emotional authority over Jaina from a young age. Even if their sexual relationship began in adulthood, many understandably questioned the legitimacy of consent in a context where one party has had lifelong psychological influence and control. So you often hear these right wingers say that drag queens and just LGBT people in general are groomers. Well, this is somebody who is literally grooming his stepdaughter into a relationship. So, was Elon Musk a drag queen at any point? I don't think so. But, they're not concerned about him precisely because he is not an apparent drag queen. And of course, you could get into a little bit of the critique of the nuclear family dynamic. You might devise a critique of the traditional family as a microcosm of authoritarian rule, where roles are rigid, obedience is demanded, and personal autonomy is often suppressed. So the Musk scandal can be seen as an example of how patriarchal and family structures can facilitate exploitation masked as intimacy or love. So the point here is, if you want to put it in simpler terms, Elon Musk is a dirty dog who, sure, you might even claim that someone in a relationship like this might actually feel love toward somebody, but you can still be a dirty dog in the process. And I think that's what most people would assume here. And there's another weird angle here, which is the commodification and reproduction aspect. Elon Musk reportedly made callous remarks about procreation during his uh, comments on this, and he's suggested that that was his purpose. And that has been a prominent part of neo fascist GOP messaging, made quite awkward and weird by people like J.D. Vance, who seem obsessed with whether other people have kids. And if you don't have kids, it's apparently akin to some sort of great moral failure, or you're a loser or something like that. Never mind that some people just don't want to have kids. Some people can't have kids physically. And some people, they might pop out a couple of kids, but it doesn't necessarily mean they're great people serving some great purpose or something like that. It just means they had kids. But this worldview, it aligns with a biological determinist or even a eugenic mindset where reproduction is not about mutual fulfillment, but about control, legacy, and genetic dominance. So, it clashes with values of mutual respect and voluntary association, and of course, the simple premise of not wanting kids because not everybody wants those. I'm one of them. Although, sure, I've had moments where I was like, oh, maybe I wouldn't mind having a kid at some point, but no, I ultimately think the independence of not having children is a pretty solid aspect of, you know, life as an adult if you make that decision, because I have fewer things to worry about. And that can sometimes be a very simple and straightforward aim in life, to just have a relatively stress free life. And that is a potentially even beautiful thing for some people. It certainly sounds better than being a dirty dog and, you know, creating kids with your stepdaughter like Elon Musk is doing here. And, putting aside the whole scandalous aspect of it, it's weird to try to tie a worldview into it. Like, can something just be because you wanted to have kids, not because it aligns with some sort of weird eugenicist point of view about how your kind needs to dominate the population, and you want some grand legacy? Like, can't you just want kids because you like the idea of having kids? But anyway, there's also a societal double standard here, of course. Many would critique the social hypocrisy where the powerful can normalize morally questionable behavior while the poor or otherwise marginalized would be punished. One of the critiques of people on welfare is that they have too many kids. And like I just suggested, one of the critiques of LGBT people is that they're groomers. Well, in this case, Elon Musk is literally somebody who groomed his stepdaughter. That a wealthy, well-connected man like Elon Musk can remain largely insulated from consequences illustrates how laws and social norms often serve power rather than any sort of real sense of justice here. So, Elon Musk's relationship with his stepdaughter is scandalous not just because it's taboo, but because it exposes how power, patriarchal worldviews, and personal boundaries can be warped in elite families. And in this case, he's literally a patriarchal figure. So this isn't me just reading from some feminist text online or something like that, right? This is somebody who is literally a father figure, a symbol of patriarchy in the most literal sense. And he created a relationship of coercive intimacy, no doubt about it. So, yeah, that's an interesting story. And again, a lot of people would say he's a dirty dog. And that there's a double standard here. Because you know what? If you're a poor person who's a dirty dog, you'll be seen as like a lowly redneck or, you know, just some sort of trash type of figure. But if you're a well-to-do family, well, people are willing to look the other way, and that includes also if you've got drug problems, if you've committed crime, other than uh, an occasional rare example where somebody who's wealthy and a criminal does get punished. But those types of examples are typically when they commit crimes against the wrong person, like other elites, like, oh, what's that one guy's name? The Well, whatever, I can't think of his name. But anyway, the point is they have these double standards and that they're sickening. And that about wraps up this episode. I've spoken for quite a while now. And yeah, hopefully you found these details interesting.